I'm Danielle, and welcome to this enchanted house. So, in my cottagecore rules you can break video, I briefly touched on the difference between aesthetic and lifestyle, but I thought we'd take a little more deeper dive into that today and talk about not just aesthetic and lifestyle, but also the terms genre and subculture, because these are all terms that kind of use similar labels. And the differences between them are very semantic, but it's kind of helpful to clarify terms going forward as we talk about all these things. And I talk about aesthetics, and for the most part, I'm usually referring to aesthetic, but some people might be referring to some of these other words and not really realize it. So in past videos, I've talked about how aesthetics are largely a sensory language, that they communicate feeling and energy and meaning through things like sight and sound and smell and taste and touch. When you adopt an aesthetic, it doesn't mean you have to make any changes to actually how you live your life. If you wanted to, you could adopt a goth aesthetic and, start wearing all black clothes, paint your room dark, use spookier motifs. I mean, you're changing some things and you're changing maybe, some shopping patterns, but in general, you don't have to change how you work or how you eat or how you relate to the world around you. The world around you might react to your aesthetic, but in general, it's a veneer. Like, it's an aesthetic, so you don't have to change anything. Which brings us to lifestyle. Lifestyle is kind of the opposite. It's change how you fundamentally live your life. Veganism is a lifestyle change. You don't have to change how your world around you feels. You don't have to change your curtains or your clothes or any of that, but fundamentally change your relationship with food, and how you procure your food and what you eat and how you experience food. It might be also you might also want to start making social changes to help promote healthy foods. And like I said, maybe only in terms of clothes, maybe you stop wearing leather, but that's not necessarily a huge change. You have to change how you learn how to cook. So there's like a lot of changes in how you actually live your life, but it doesn't change how the world looks around you. I mean, it can. You can. I'm sure there is something like that is called the vegan aesthetic, but you don't need to adopt that aesthetic to adopt the lifestyle. So next up is genre, which is one of my favorite places to go because I am a English major. So genre refers to different subcategories of artistic composition, like writing or music or painting. And this can get confused with aesthetic because some genres also have an aesthetic. For example, goth, which we talked about earlier as aesthetic, also is a genre of music. It includes bands like Bauhaus and The Cure. Often the aesthetic comes out of the genre, which was the case for goth. Another example would be one of my favorites, steampunk. Steampunk started off as a literary genre and then went on to inspire the aesthetic. However, it's entirely possible to enjoy a genre without participating in the aesthetic. And the example I like to give is my husband is really into heavy metal music. He's like an expert. He can name off bands and songs and concerts, and he knows he knows all about it, and he listens to it all the time. And telling you that, you would expect him probably to dress kind of like this, but he dresses more like this. I mean, like everyday dresses like this. This is not just his work dress. This is just how he dresses. And I asked him about it, and his response was he don't have to wear the uniform to enjoy the music, which is valid. And there are people, I'm sure, who would say, "Oh, poser." But you know what? People can like what they like, and you don't have to. I mean, sports fans don't have to wear their team jersey to the game. There's no law requiring it. So, like with most things, genre can exist separately from aesthetic, and definitely separately from lifestyle. Which brings us to subculture. Subculture is a group within the culture at large that has a shared set of beliefs or interests that are different from the culture at large. So these would include things like aesthetic, lifestyle, and genre. With subculture, people are bonding over the shared interests rather than just the actual interest in the thing itself. Subculture is when we talk about those things as communities. Witchcraft is actually a subculture that shares beliefs and a vague shared set of morals and, belief in nature and magic and spirits. But there's also shared genre elements in terms of literature and shared aesthetic elements. And we've even seen when the aesthetics kind of pulled out of that and you get something like witchcore. So where we run into problems is when people don't clarify what they're talking about or conflate the terms. And to give you an example of this, let me introduce you to the girls. This is Calamity. And this is Jane. They are a pair of Nerf guns I customize as for accessories for a steampunk costume. Way back, sort of late 2009s, early 2010s, when steampunk was just, percolating to popularity, I was on steampunk forums and steampunk groups and participating in the subculture. And I got into a really heated argument with a guy who claimed the guns I was making like these aren't steampunk. And his argument was, well, steampunk, if you're real steampunk, you're using materials authentic to the period. You only use brass or wood or glass or, real materials. And I'm just painting plastic guns. And I didn't even make those guns myself. I just took guns that already existed and modified them. My argument was that my guns look like something that could come right out of a steampunk novel. That, that the characters of a Gail Carriger novel could, definitely pull those out. And even though I didn't make them myself, I modified them and I took them and transformed them from something into something else. And that's definitely within the maker lifestyle part of steampunk. And the problem wasn't that either of us were wrong or right, though I always get stuck on the one, people who are exclusionary and go, oh, you can't be a true if you do this. But the problem was we were talking about steampunk in different ways. For this guy, steampunk was a lifestyle and an aesthetic. It meant changing the way you lived. You didn't want to use plastic or modern methods. You wanted to rely on these, Victorian industrial age things, and it was all about, craftsmanship. He was one of these guys who dressed steampunk every day. I, on the other hand, for me, steampunk was largely aesthetic and genre. I loved reading steampunk novels and consuming steampunk media. And examining the possibility, these reimagined possibilities of what the world had been like if the Industrial Revolution had gone in a different direction. And I love the aesthetic. I love dressing up on occasion, and mostly for things like gatherings or conventions. So we both had a shared interest in steampunk, but we were coming at it from very different directions. And I kind of wish I could go back in time and say, hey, you know what? You've got some valid points here. But you know what? Maybe I'm talking more about steampunk as this thing, and you're talking more about steampunk as this thing. And maybe they both can coexist, and we can both celebrate and learn from each other. So, anyways, like I said at the beginning of the video, from here on out, if you hear me talking about something, I'm always talking about the aesthetic. Unless I specifically say otherwise. Like when I get into when I talk about individual aesthetics, I may get into the history and where they came from and how they developed, in which case I'm going to have to talk about genre, I'm going to have to talk about lifestyle, I'm going to have to talk about subculture. But when I'm talking about aesthetic magic, I'm literally talking about aesthetic. I'm talking about the veneer. I'm talking about that language, sensory language that we use to communicate. And those aesthetic can communicate things like genre and lifestyle and all that. But it doesn't have to. And likewise, those things exist, and they don't necessarily have to have an aesthetic. So I hope this clarifies some things for you. I hope there's some terms here maybe you learned. I hope you stick around as we explore more with aesthetic and witchcraft and magic. If you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe, check out my other videos. If you want to connect with me on social media, I will have links below to my Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I've also started a Patreon, so if you want to get in on the ground floor and support this channel in other ways, I would love it, and I would give you a big thank you. And I'll see you guys all next time, okay?